Back in July of last year, I posted a video covering a large portion of unused areas in Security Breach. That video ended up doing much better than I ever could have hoped. So obviously, I've got to make a follow-up. A few months after that video, a PlayStation 4 pre-release was decompiled. This pre-release was dated roughly 2 weeks before the game's release on December 16th, and had a lot of noteworthy differences. One big one was that the camera minimap was outdated and showed an early layout of the pizzaplex, meaning it mapped out all the cut rooms I showed in that last video, and more. It didn't take long for data miners to decompile the pre-release and pry that old map out of the files, and today we're going to cover everything about the pre-release pizzaplex because now we have a map of the whole thing. The first thing to point out about this map is how some floors are merged together. For example, floor 4, which has the West Arcade and Bonnie Bowl, is combined with floor 3 on this map. Steel Wool moved the West Arcade and Bonnie Bowl up a floor because they needed the elevators to make sense, but here the map is consistent, with real-world positions for all the Pizzaplex's rooms and tunnels, with zero compromises. Let's work our way down the map from the second floor all the way down to the basement. There's a lot to cover, so I don't want to waste any time. Let's start with floor 2. The first thing we notice is that the balcony extends further on both sides of the atrium, connecting behind the stage. Behind there, the catwalk above the removed backstage area is mapped out, an area that I showed in my last video. Furthermore, we can see where the Glamrock Salon balcony juts out, another area that I showcased in that video. The next feature of this map dates it a little bit, because right here, there is a long corridor between L-Chips and Mazer-Size. But if you watched my last video, you'd know that this area is actually a series of corridors that connect to L-Chips, Mazer-Size, the atrium balcony, the daycare, the bakery hallway, and even the Kids Cove lighthouse. Clearly, this means that the map is older than the one I showed in my other video, so try to keep that in mind if something doesn't make a lot of sense. The next change to cover is how there's no airlock between L-Chips and the East Arcade. This is a version of the East Arcade that we saw in the NVIDIA showcase for the game, and the much more popular version of the East Arcade among those who care enough to know the difference. Moving on to the prize counter, it seems as though there was another room planned to the left of the main area, but also the fire escape is gone, perhaps because it wasn't planned at this point. Bonnie Bowl has a few differences to consider, like the long corridor behind the bowling alley, which connects up to the kitchen storage area, and then further connects into the West Arcade utility hallway. The bathrooms and the entrance hallway of Bonnie Bowl connect up to a smaller hallway, which leads directly into one of the karaoke rooms in the West Arcade. Lastly, there's a big entrance to the West Arcade from the bottom of Bonnie Bowl, an entrance that we've actually seen in the NVIDIA trailer for the game. Next up is the West Arcade, which, including the entrances just talked about, has 5 new entrances on the second floor alone. There are the 3 that we talked about from Bonnie Bowl, there's another one that connects to the prize corner, which can still be partially found in the current version of the game, and there's one more which replaces the elevator on the second floor for a corridor. Again, another thing that I showed in the light test map. The last thing to touch on for the West Arcade are the 3 corridors that link the main arcade to the utility hallway. We can actually see one of these in the October trailer for the game, a little less than a month before the game's release. And that's all the changes for the second floor. Now, moving on to the first floor, we have even more going on with the West Arcade. First of all, we can see that the elevator has been replaced with a hallway that connects directly to both the atrium and the lobby. This is another area that we have in-game proof of, and once more an area that I showcased in the light test video. It's certainly one of the coolest cut rooms in my opinion. That's one of the reasons it ended up being the thumbnail for that video. It's a very visually pleasing area, and it looks great in-game. Next up, and the last change made for the West Arcade, is that we can see where the out of order door under the stairs extends, but we'll cover that more later. Moving on up to Roxy Raceway, we have a few things to look at. There's a staircase that leads down from the long corridor to behind the party garages, which we'll talk about more later. There's an entrance into Roxy Raceway from the salon, and the salon itself has a new entrance from the Roxy Raceway sub-lobby. The balcony, just like the second floor, extends slightly further in this map, but not as much this time. There's also a backstage entrance which connects to the bakery, which again, we've seen in the light test map. Of course, we have the balcony entrance into the bakery, but more interestingly, there's a staircase from the Monty Golf sub-lobby that leads to another entrance. We can just about see what this looked like in the old teaser image from one of Dorco's charity live streams. The main bakery hallway extends much further to the right than it does in-game. Furthermore, it continues up and seems to stop at a dead end. While it's not shown on the map, we know that there's a daycare airlock positioned here below the hallway, as remnants of it can still be found in-game. Not much is different about the daycare, however the airlock that connects to the bakery hallway and the lighthouse in Kids Cove is shown here. Other than that, the daycare is basically untouched on this floor. If we take a look at the lobby, we can see that the elevators do not make an appearance, just like the light test map. The last interesting differences are two staircases that I'd imagine lead down to the food court kitchens, connecting up to these utility hallways I showed at the very end of the last video. The ground floor is our next destination and has quite a lot to talk about. Firstly, if we look to the left, we can see that there used to be a long passage that went from behind the Roxy Raceway party garages all the way to the sub-lobby junction here. There are two staircases connected to the hallway which lead down to the basement, and the hallway itself leads off to the main Roxy Raceway entrance, an area which isn't accessible in the current version of the game, but for some reason is shown in the options menu. Moving on, however, we can see a staircase backstage, and as we've seen previously, the staircase leads all the way up to the backstage catwalk and seemingly all the way down to parts in service. There's also another staircase on the other side of the backstage that mirrors the first. While we're here though, let's discuss backstage. There's a lot going on here because this is one of the biggest areas removed from the game, but at the same time, it's one of the cut rooms that can still be found in the files and loaded back in. There are 6 different entrances to the area on this floor alone, 1 in the west hallway, 3 in Rockstar Row, 1 vent entrance in the east hall, and 1 to the left of the stage. The entrance to the left of the stage and the northmost one in Rockstar Row are both still in the game, but they don't lead you backstage. Instead, they go under it. This has caused some to speculate that the backstage has been totally removed and will never be re-implemented. This is not true. The underpass was always an intended feature of the backstage area. The room under the office has always existed too, but was intended to be much bigger. As we can see, there are 2 doors to the left and right with matching walls. Additionally, the staircase and underpass don't interfere with any part of the backstage, and the door that leads out to the left of the show stage couldn't have led directly backstage because the wall of the area starts here, too far from the door itself. Moving on up from the backstage to the left, we can see 3 rooms. This is the VIP area, another set of rooms that can be loaded back in. We can see here the dance floor, the kitchen, and the toilets, as well as all the areas that connect them to the rest of the building. To the right of the VIP lounge, we can see 3 hallways connect Rockstar Row to the long pathway that leads to the rehearsal room. Following along that path, we can see that it actually extends much further than we see in-game, and proceeds to wrap around the rehearsal room and down into a whole section of cut corridor that ends with a direct entrance to the Monty Golf sub-lobby. And speaking of the Monty Golf lobby, look, the elevator's gone. It's been replaced with a long windy hallway to Monty Golf instead. This is another area that we have video evidence of, and one of my personal favourite unused areas in the game. Not much is actually different in Monty Golf, though, however, there does appear to be a new room behind the kitchen which may connect to the bakery hallway section we covered earlier. Moving down to the sub-lobby junction, we can see that, just like its western counterpart, it extends further out towards the attractions, although not as far this time. It extends out north with a small corridor to connect it to the Monty Golf entrance, and a larger corridor that connects south to the daycare and Kids Cove. Taking a look in the daycare, there's a new corridor that connects the hallways on either side of the play area and also continues right along the theatre. An old, unused daycare security office was found in the files not long ago, and perhaps this corridor is where that office would have been situated. Next up, the vent next to salads and sides has been changed completely and looks to lead to the lobby security office instead of going down to the basement kitchen. Maybe this was the original way of getting into the atrium at the start of the game. The corridors that connect the lobby and the food court kitchens are shown here, as well as the other side of the food court, which is usually inaccessible in-game, but no one really doubted its existence anyway. Last but not least for this floor is a hallway that connects customer service to the lobby security office. This same hallway also connects to the West Arcade via a staircase, which can be loaded back into the game. The staircase then connects up to the out of order door under the stairs in the West Arcade. Basement 1 has by far the most changes out of any floor. Just how much? Well, here's the Basement 1 map from the current release of the game. And here's the pre-release version of that same map. As you can see, a lot is different to the point where it's hard to really say what all the extra rooms mean or what they could have been used for. Luckily, there's actually a lot more we can learn about these unused rooms than you might think. Security Breach has what it likes to call the room system. From what I've been able to work out, the room system is a catalogue of every single defined room in the pizzaplex. Each room is tied to a set of coordinates that correspond to its position in the world. What's good about this is that if you get your hands on the game's debug menu, you can display your current coordinates and the room you're in. So, for example, if we click Show Coordinates in the cafeteria, we'll get our X, Y, and Z coordinates, as well as the name of the room, which is Cafeteria. I'm sure you can see where this is going. If we travel out of bounds to the areas where these old rooms used to be, we can open our coordinates display to discover the names of all these unused rooms. And that's exactly what I did. I spent a few days making this image as well as I could, and I even color-coded the different areas. Let's dive into all this, shall we? Let's start somewhere that we're familiar with. Take this room up here, RNDBS1. The BS is short for backstage. This is the room where you collect the Golden Roxy plushie locked behind the cyclone fence that you need Monty's claws to get through. North of here is the staircase that we use at the very beginning of the game to get down to Basement 2. Now, let's look at what was removed. As you can see, there used to be a small corridor to the right of the staircase that would have led to another staircase. That staircase would have led you down to Parts and Service. Notice the codename SV, short for the service in Parts and Service. A long corridor connects the R&D room to the east side of the basement, where a small set of corridors that also belong to the backstage area link up with two staircases. One up top, which would also take you down to Parts and Service, and another which would mirror the big staircase on the left, going all the way down to Basement 2 and then all the way up to the backstage catwalk. Over on the Gator Golf side, everything here was cut, so I won't talk about every room, but I will talk about the more interesting room names and connections. There's one room named Plants GG, perhaps a storage area for the attractions plants, I'm not sure. There's a set of seemingly two rooms which share the name Gas Proc GG. This room is actually 2 floors tall, with the bottom floor connecting the 2 top segments. We'll touch on this area more later because it is interesting. There's a staircase that connects to the plants room. This staircase takes you up to the room behind the level 10 door in the sub-lobby junction and also goes down to Basement 2. Ever wanted to know what was meant to be behind this level 10 door? Well, it's this staircase here that connects to Corridor 4. Lastly, there's one more staircase which leads down to Basement 2 and links up to the bottom floor of the Gas Proc room. And that's all there is for Monty Golf for now. The daycare has some interesting rooms to talk about. Corridor 6 actually slips down into Basement 2 before coming back up on the other side. A full restroom area behind the wardrobe was cut, and a second storage area can be seen just south. The main draw of this area is the daycare boiler room, which is this whole area here. Interestingly, there are 4 staircases down to Basement 2, with everything down there still being a part of the boiler room. The boiler room would have been part of a cut mission. We know this because of some Cut Freddy dialogue.
Perhaps if you adjusted the heat in the boiler room, you could melt it. The boiler room is down in the utilidors. I will mark it on your map. However, I do not recommend you go there.
The boiler room conveniently connects down here to Corridor 2, which is one of the rooms still in the game, along with Corridor 3 and Storage 3, which wasn't present on this map for some reason. That's it for the daycare, but before we move on to the kitchen, let's talk about the grey rooms in the middle. Most of it is pretty uninteresting, just a large rectangle to serve as a hub for the basement. The most notable detail would be the 2 staircases which lead down to the endo warehouse, which would have been pretty nifty. This area over here, main corridor southwest, is the exact corridor that Monty chases us down in the intro to the game. This means that we might be able to catch a glimpse of exactly what these cut corridors used to look like in the February gameplay trailer for the game, as we are shown this exact space in said trailer. As you can see, down the very end it looks kind of like the would-be entrance to Corridor Backstage 1, so savor this screenshot because it might be the last remains we have of the old basement. Let's go to the kitchen now, which, save for a few cut rooms, is mostly intact in the current build of the game. Corridor FC2 is interesting because it's an area we see in the game, but we're unable to access. It's this corridor behind Roxy. You can never get back here in the game because the fence never opens and the door on the other side is completely blocked off. The only actually cut rooms here are the vat overlook and the large vat room. However, just like the corridor before, we've seen this area in one of the game's trailers. Specifically, the very first trailer for the game, which was released back in September of 2020. Yikes. But there it is, and it looks awesome. I know I'm not the only one who wants this back in game. Phasablast is next, and there's a lot to talk about. Ever wondered where this large corridor that you see during the intro of the game goes? Well, it splits off 2 ways. On the right, it connects to the Roxy Raceway portion of the basement, and on the left, it goes to the base of the spiral staircase from the Vanny ending. All the rooms on the right here are used in the intro to the game currently, so there's nothing new here. Corridor FB4 can be found in game, but everything north from this path is blocked by a door which requires a level 12 security pass. I can't say why there's a level 12 door here, but what's beyond this door is interesting. There's another R&D room, but this one is unique in that there's a second corridor, specifically Corridor 10, which passes through above the room. The staircase on the left of Corridor 10 is actually the room where the Vanny ending begins, and the staircase on the right of Corridor 10 is one that links up to the Phasablast security office. This whole area of the map is a little difficult to understand, but just try to keep in mind that the darker pink is for the rooms below and the lighter pink is for the rooms that are above. As you can see, Corridor 9 starts on the top half, but a staircase leads it down to Corridor 5 on the bottom floor. The staircase at the end of Corridor 11 links up to the cut hallway down from the sublobby junction that we discussed earlier. Corridor 7 actually connects up to a grey room that I forgot to mention before. Most of this room belongs to a staircase that goes all the way up to the bowling alley and also connects up to the hallway you typically enter Roxy Raceway from on the first floor. Down from the grey room there's one last corridor with a staircase that leads up to the storage room with the Fredbear's poster that sits just outside the Phasablast maze. I know Phasablast was a lot, but we're almost done. The last area we're going to look at is Roxy Raceway. Gasproc makes a return, this time on the Roxy Raceway half of the basement. Personally, I'm at a loss for what Gasproc even means. If you have any ideas, let me know, because even though we're covering cut content, this seems like something important. But all that's left to discuss really are the 3 staircases that lead down to basement 2 from corridors 3, 4, and 6. And that's everything. Wow, when you came to this video, did you think there would be this much? I'm sure many of you have seen my other security breach video and had an idea about some of these unused rooms, but this? Everything that we've just covered existed at some point and it was all removed before the game's release. Will we see any of this come back in Ruin? I really hope so. A lot of these rooms are implied to still exist based on level 10 and 12 doors placed throughout the building. The best we can do is hope, and believe me, I'll be looking for any evidence of these cut rooms when the trailer for Ruin comes out. I don't make videos very often, but when I do, I try my best to make them worth watching, so I'd appreciate it immensely if you subscribed. Anyway, enough of that drivel, because we're still not done. Basement 2. While there isn't nearly as much down here as in Basement 1, there is still quite a bit to talk about. Let's start where we left off, Roxy Raceway. The 3 staircases we finished on last time all connect up to a decently sized garage room. If this area looks or sounds whatsoever familiar, that's because it's one of the only basement rooms present in the light test map, so everything on the top left here can still be found within the game. The staircase on the far left goes up and connects with the staircase at the end of the Roxy boss fight, which is pretty neat. Just down and to the right a bit is the Basement 2 gas proc for Roxy Raceway. The room itself is higher than the rest of Basement 2, but I'm sure you can see just how the Basement 1 areas would link up here. This room was actually replaced in the current version of the game. Corridor 2 is the med bay that Freddy takes us to in the intro. When you come back to this area later, you can go up the stairs and all the way to the gas proc room, but it's been replaced with a small room that has one of the retro CDs. Strange. Let's move up to parts and service now. Not a lot is actually different here, almost everything made the cut, but there are a few things. We can see where the 2 staircases from before link down into the waiting room, which is cool, and we can also see how the big staircase on the right used to be at the end of the corridor where Mapbot shows up. This area here, in fact, was changed a lot in-game from being the small corridor that connects to the northeast path to just being a large room, and I'm not sure why. Let's move on to the grey now, and there is a bit to talk about. The stage lift used to have a second exit to the south, which would have linked up to a long path that would have also connected up to the Endo warehouse from the top. The leftmost half of Corridor North 2 was cut, but the small windy pathway leading to it on the left was kept, but instead of linking to the hallway, Steelwool replaced it with the plush baby Easter egg room instead. A huge change here is how the warehouse is more than twice the size of what it is in game. If Steelwool had kept the warehouse this big, the Endo section might have been challenging. Everything south of the atrium staircases was removed, and there really isn't much down here anyway. There is a corridor which belongs to the kitchen, but I'm not sure how it would have connected, as there are no staircases that would connect this hallway close to the kitchen at all. Next up, Gator Golf. We can see the bottom half of the gas proc room, and the staircase on the right links up with Basement 1's Gator Golf Corridor 4 on the rightmost half of the map, which is cool. And this is it, the daycare. Here we can see what we probably assumed would be here. Corridor 6 connects up to Basement 1 on both ends, but there's a storage room connected to it. And finally, the boiler area is just a smaller version of what it is on the floor above, the 4 staircases aligning perfectly with Basement 1. And there you have it. With Basement 2 covered, that's everything that we can gather from these pre-release images. One thing you probably noticed is that the sewers weren't here. Well, you'd be right to point that out. In-game, the map of the sewers is a part of Basement 2, despite the fact that signs around the sewers imply that it's technically Basement 3. There is no pre-release map of Basement 3, unfortunately, so we don't have a map of the area despite there being evidence to suggest that there were a lot more of the sewers that we didn't get to see. The underground pizzeria also isn't present here, but I'd assume that's because they hadn't made the area yet. Let me know if you were surprised by the sheer amount of the building that was cut. With Security Breach, it's been a year-long scavenger hunt for cut content, but at this point, I genuinely think we might have found all of it. From everything I've shared in this video and my last one, to the really good Lost Bits videos about the game, and some fairly extensive coverage of the pre-release build, I really do think we've found it all. So now that we're here, I want to know what you think about all this. Is everything that we've found a good or bad sign for the future of the game? And are you more or less excited for Ruin knowing that all of this exists? That's all I've got for now. Thank you so much for watching, it means the world, and I'll see you next time.